Hey friends, welcome to another week of church here at the Durango Vineyard. I'm so glad you joined us. This week we are in our series called Awake My Soul. And here's the basis of the series. Is it possible that God could wake us up on the inside? And I think for all of us, the reason we keep coming back to God and to church and keep digging into His Word and keep relating to Christian community is because we have this hope. This belief that God could wake us up on the inside. And yet we also recognize that, man, life just has a way of beating us down on the inside. It seems like the older we get, the more we tend towards safety, loneliness, tiredness, jadedness. This week, Paul DeVernak's going to share, and he's going to share on the subject of becoming like a child. And we believe in this installment, you'll see how when Jesus talked about becoming like a child, He was talking about awaking our soul. Be blessed. Sit back, enjoy. I'm so glad you're with us.
Have you ever watched a 3 or 4-year-old child trip and skin their knee? And there's a moment when it could go either way. And if you jump in quickly enough with, it's okay, it's good, I love you, it doesn't hurt that much, they're all smiles within seconds. That moment for them was on the edge, and you tipped it in one direction or the other. Tears and sobbing could have happened just as easily. That moment on the knife edge of the present, it's a potent place, isn't it? A long time ago, I think about 35 years ago, I started wondering about a familiar passage of Scripture. Matthew 18, verses 1 to 3. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and they asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child to him and He placed the child among them and He said, "Truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." There's a similar passage in Luke 18. Jesus seems to say that unless you and I become like a little child, we can't enter His kingdom. Well, at age 30, I started wondering seriously, what does this mean? I was starting to get some life under my belt, and this teaching seemed puzzling. In fact, it seemed almost impossible for me to comprehend. Well, I'm 65 now, and in the last decade, it's become even more mysterious to me. In some ways, I feel like I've seen too much of life. I've watched people I love get desperately injured, and I've watched too many people die. At times, a lot of times, frankly, it feels like my soul has grown old. At times, I feel rusted and jaded. Unless you think this is a problem just for us 50 to 80-year-olds, I have some young friends in their 20s who have what they call old souls too, and they describe themselves in just this way. What in the world did Jesus mean? I mean, if you collide, like I do sometimes, with the pointlessness of things, or even if you're a lucky one, and you've done everything you ever wanted to do in life, but you still resonate with the writer of Ecclesiastes when he says, "There's nothing new under the sun." If you have an old soul like I do, well then if becoming like a little child is what it takes, it can feel like there's no hope for me, or maybe even for my young friends who feel that way too. So what's the key to becoming like a little child? Is it innocence? Is it being untouched by ugliness and evil? Is a little child's honesty, his or her innocent boldness, their curiosity, their eagerness to learn? What is it? Is it their endless questions? Their ability to be surprised? Their ability to somehow trust in this big, mysterious, benevolent universe? And then I wonder, how can someone who is deeply scarred get unscarred? Well, if you're older, or if you're a victim of trauma, if you're different, if you've been badly hurt or betrayed along the way, if you've ever flirted with the idea of suicide, if you've been through a depression, if you're lonely, if you're cynical and worn out, if sometimes you feel like you've seen it all and you've lost your capacity to be surprised by wonder, this idea of becoming a little child again seemed ridiculous and hopeless in the extreme. How can an old soul become like little child again and discover Jesus and his kingdom? Well, at age 65, I'd like to suggest today that the key is living in the present with a capital P. If that sounds too simple to you, I hope that you'll hear me out. Living in the present is a choice. It's a discipline. It's a way of living each day that can change your life. I think little kids do it naturally. If they're jubilant, you know it. If they're sad, it's all over their face. They just are who they are. It's more difficult for us as adults because we have to choose to live in the present. We have to focus. Sometimes we have to accept. Sometimes we have to let go. Sometimes I find that I have to forgive reality for not being better than it is. I've been thinking recently about a somewhat different definition of faith, and I'd like you to try this on and think about it for a few days, see what you think. Faith is trusting reality, knowing that God is somehow working in your situation already, even before anything changes. I'm learning that God is always up to far more than you and I can understand or even conceive. Thomas Merton, a Catholic who is perhaps the best known spiritual teacher of the last century, once said to a room of young would-be monks, "Men, before you have a spiritual life, you have to have a life." And if I put myself in their shoes, I want to say, wait, I do have a life. But it's a messy and it's a confusing life, and it's full of unanswered questions. But my life is the only place that I can possibly begin to know God, isn't it? I am recognizing that life is more risky, less predictable, more mysterious, more varied, and less simple than I ever thought possible. I'm discovering, too, that this universe is more magical, less controllable, more infinite, and more wonderfully troubling than I ever thought I'd be able to tolerate when I was younger. Little children, they know that God is wild, He's mysterious, He's free. They know intuitively that life and God are a mystery, and that no words, no description, no book can contain Him. Little children are content to live in mystery. They know that they don't know very much at all, and it doesn't seem to bother them very much. They approach the mystery of life with great curiosity. We adults, on the other hand, I think we spend a lot of our time trying to eliminate mystery from our lives. We want to control things, tidy things up, put everything into a neat box. We modern folks, we tend to think that if our lives are to have any meaning at all, that it's up to us to figure out and create that meaning for ourselves. It is all up to us. Well, what if the universe is actually full of enchantment? What if there's meaning literally strewn everywhere, and there are droplets of grace sprinkled on your path every day? If that's true, and I want to believe with all my heart that it is, then it's clear that I need eyes to see. I need awareness with a capital A. I'm discovering that awareness can be cultivated, that it can grow and become more natural. Little children are who they are. They haven't learned to start impersonating themselves yet. They haven't learned to construct a false self that helps them to move through this world. There's no facade. There's no carefully constructed persona. They're real and they're present. We adults experience so much distraction. I think we suffer unnecessary pain. And we are often clueless and miss precious opportunities when we allow the past or the future to interfere in our present. At birth, each of us is handed this lens through which we begin to see life. And it's a lens that's given to us primarily by our family of origin and to some extent by our innate personality. But it's also shaped by our hometown, our culture, our peers. I think that lens from our family of origin is actually what often passes for our spiritual life and our morality early on. But at some point, we begin to wonder what's actually true. And we start to wonder, can I actually have a say in shaping the lens through which I see life? That awareness, that decision to start making choices, happens only in the present. We have to learn to see. We have to learn to be aware. I believe that the tyranny of the past is never greater than when you and I are unaware of how our past has actually shaped us. We need awareness. If you've ever been to a family reunion or a holiday family gathering with extended family present that went awry, as family gatherings do, when fully grown adults default to these default modes of behavior that everyone recognizes but nobody likes, I mean, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? Where on earth did those words come from? Where'd that ridiculous, crazy behavior come from? Probably from some deep, buried, unexamined place in the past. A good friend of mine says frequently, there ain't no future in the past. If you have a past that was less than perfect, your past does not have to be the template for either your present or your future. But I submit to you that it's necessary to be aware of how our pasts have shaped us if we're going to move on, if we are to change the trajectory of our family tree for the better. Any counselor or therapist will tell you that you cannot be healed of what you don't acknowledge. You know, none of us jumps out of bed in the morning and you say, I think I'm going to do the same stupid things I've done in the past. If I choose to focus on the present, on today, on this moment, it might just be possible for me not to replicate my negative history again, to not make the same mistakes, to not operate out of those same default modes of thinking and behavior that I just don't think about. They're unconscious. They come from my parents, my culture, trauma I've experienced, and from God knows where. I'd like to suggest that this kind of change can only come if you're aware and if you're present. How much courage am I able to muster in this real life that the world seems to have given me? Paula D'Arcy says that God comes to us disguised as our life. And if I think about it, the only person who's consistently present in this long-acting drama that is my life is me. It stands to reason that I might bear some responsibility for how things are turning out. I need to have my eyes wide open. And the only place I can do that is right now, in the present. Well, what about the future? My mom, who died about a little over 3 years ago, December 2017, had a plaque hanging in the bathroom of our family cabin north of Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And the plaque said, "Whoever said that worrying about the future doesn't help? Almost all the things I worry about never happen." The only time, literally the only time that the future becomes real is when it turns into the present. We are told multiple places in Scripture not to worry about the future. That unnecessary worry can literally suck the life out of your soul. Of course, we need to plan. We're human beings. We live on planet Earth, and time for us seems to run in a line. It runs sequentially. I decided to go to medical school at age 30, but I didn't emerge from the tunnel of my orthopedic surgery residency and the fellowship that came after until I was 42. I didn't start my career until I was 42 years old. And I could talk for quite a while, I'm not going to, but I could, about delayed gratification, about studying for multiple board exams over more than 1 decade. I could talk about preparing for literally thousands of surgical cases during my career. But the purpose for all of that planning was it so I could be at my best in the present. It's one of the things I love best about the operating room. I was 100% in the present. Every bit of me focused right now on everything that I knew so I could get the best outcome for my patient. The present was where it mattered. The present was, and it is, where the rubber meets the road. The same God who promises not to leave you or forsake you right now also promises at every single moment in the future to be right there with you then as well. If you have an old soul like I often do, our illusions have to be undone before we can become like little children again. I'm starting to think of it as a second childhood that happens only after some necessary suffering. As somebody said, it's the simplicity on the other side of complexity. It's a simplicity that knows very well that life is oftentimes a mess, a tumbled up, tangled mess, where everything somehow belongs, though. There's kind of a sober happiness or a joyful sadness, a deep okayness to life. And there's this deep acknowledgement that oftentimes, in spite of evidence to the contrary, that life is good. It's worth it. I've been thinking the last couple of years about my life as a train running down a set of train tracks. One rail is joy, and the other rail is pain. At any given moment these days, if I let myself think about it, I can find both joy and pain in my life. I think you know what I'm talking about. And I realize that this is how it's going to be until my time on planet Earth is complete. But it's okay. In fact, I sense that there's a deep goodness to life. And that's a miracle. Somehow it all belongs. The lights, the shadows, the boredom and the excitement, the joy and the pain. I've started being able, at least some of the time, to forgive things for being what they are. I realize now, and my wife and my daughters and my friends could have told you this decades ago, but I realize now that I am not the sun. Everything doesn't revolve around me. I'm just one among many, and that's okay. I'm done trying to be exceptional. Much of my life, I felt like I was living on the edge or someplace pretty near the edge. I was different. I've realized that I'm just me, and that's good. In fact, who else could I possibly be? And sometimes you can see things from the edge that you actually can't see from the center. So how can we become like little children and live in the present? We could discuss this for hours, and I need to wind up my thoughts soon here. But I'd like to give you a few suggestions, things that I'm consciously working on myself. Here's the first one. A conscious, regular practice of gratitude helps. Consciously saying thank you for all the good things and the wonderful people in my life. My wife Rosie has a magnet on our refrigerator that says, life is a gift. That's why they call it the present. Friends, do you see the gift? Do you see this moment? A life that flows out of the serenity prayer is a life in the present. God, please grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We could have an entire talk or an entire series of talks on acceptance. Here's another suggestion. Seeking beauty, going out of your way for beauty, pursuing beauty with all your being, pulls you and me irresistibly into the present. And I would suggest that you and I can never, ever have too much beauty in our lives. There are a number of meditative practices that can pull you into the present. The mindfulness movement and counseling has been of immense help to many, many people. And it's fascinating to me that most meditation practices seem to begin with a focus on the body, oftentimes with a deep focus on your breathing. And I've discovered, as an orthopedic surgeon, but just recently I've discovered that our bodies only live in the present. We feel pain in the present. We feel endorphins in the present. We laugh. We cry in the present. And if we focus our bodies in the present through a simple thing like breathing, oftentimes our minds and our hearts will follow. Wherever you are, be all there. Friends, don't let today's blessings pass you by. When we miss the good stuff now, a conversation with a friend, the touch of my wife, a joke from my 93-year-old father, one of my kids' phone calls or texts, when I miss the stuff now, I end up with regret. I have truly discovered that God doesn't always give me what I want, but then He goes and He strews beautiful things, good gifts, in places that I least expect, sometimes when I'd given up hope. I need awareness. I need eyes to see. All of the encouragements in Scripture to love each other, to bear one another's burdens, to be generous, only happen in the present. Good intentions are like drifting fog. It only becomes real when they become present, when they happen in the reality that is now. If I feel stuck or mightily confused in the present, it helps me to remember that spiritually there are no dead ends. None. God doesn't waste anything. It helps me to remember that every time that God forgives me, He's actually demonstrating that He values His relationship with me more than He does some set of rules. It helps me to remember every day that the God who made all the beautiful things and places that I care about so much, that same God actually wants to live in me. The God who created Canyonlands, the Rocky Mountains, the Pacific Ocean, the God that made 2 trillion galaxies actually wants to live in you and me. Amazing. Friends, right now, in this present moment, and in all the moments to come, you and I are accepted. We're forgiven. We're loved. Go in peace. So I have 3 questions that you might want to think about. When's the last time that you felt like a little child? What makes it difficult for you to live in the present? When is the time in your life that you realized that God was actually with you in that exact moment?